Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to this quick tutorial on 123D Design. I'm building this to help you guys teach your students how to use 3D modeling so that they can be prepared for 3D printing their objects. So when you first open the software, you're going to be greeted with this Welcome to 123D Design scene. What you want to do is tell your students, hey, let's start a new project, and you'll be entered into the workspace. First thing I always like to do, go over the interface and the camera controls in any software. So first, we're going to go up to the Primitives tab. I'm going to click Box, and then I'm going to click a box in the scene. Notice that little white dot? That's going to be important later, but right now, just be aware that that is where your cube will be placed. So that is the center of the cube, so wherever you put that, that'll be the center of the object. So let's just place it right here for now. And then the next thing I like to talk about are the camera controls. These are really critical for students to understand right away, and it's really important that they understand that they are moving themselves, not the object. So the first thing they're going to do is they're going to orbit the camera. That's right click and drag. Will allow them to move around the object. The next thing is pan. That's middle click and drag. You can drag your object around like that. Sorry, not drag your object around, drag yourself around. Remember that. You're not moving the object, you're moving yourself. Third, is the scroll command. So you zoom in and zoom out using the scroll wheel. Notice that if you put your cursor somewhere else, it'll zoom where your cursor is. So that's a critical thing to remember. So if you want to zoom in to get more detail so you can pick something or select something, push your cursor on that object and then scroll forward. Okay? Then the last thing I like to teach with this general subset of things is that if people ever get lost, I like to, so like for instance, I'm going to move out here and I can't see what's going on. I like to tell them, hey guys, there's a safety net here. You have the fit command. So if you either click on this button or hit F on your keyboard, it'll zoom to the extent of your object and your back. So it's really important for students to understand that this is here so if they ever get lost. So kind of helps them from keep getting too scared about moving the camera around. And if while you're teaching, if they end up getting lost, they know how to save themselves, essentially. So last for the camera controls is on the top here, the top right corner, you have your view cube. So if you click on any one of these faces or one of these arrows, it'll orbit your camera. You can also, if you end up getting upside down or something like that, you can click the little rotational arrows in the top right corner. And that'll flip your object right side up again. I'm going to go back to the 3/4 view. Sound good so far? On the top of the screen, we have all of our object manipulation tools. We have undo, redo, our transform tools, creation tools, stuff like that. On the right side of the screen, we have everything that controls our camera controls. In the bottom here, we have our grid options and our snap options. I never discuss this, I never teach like specifically how to edit these when I'm teaching, but I do call attention to them just so students know they're there. Basically, as I move my object, you'll see that it kind of jumps in little increments. Those increments are defined down here, but don't ever touch those. You don't have to worry about them. Okay, so that's pretty much it for the interface. Let's start a new scene by going to the Autodesk 123D Design, new scene, and let's get to the next section of this tutorial. So next, the first thing I'd like to do is teach how to create a table. This is a basic primer for students on moving their objects, creating objects, scaling objects, simple stuff like that. And again, it's driving home, move around with the camera. Always be looking at the object from different angles. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to create a cube. I'm going to drop it in there. Software calls it a box. I'm going to hit the F key to zoom in, so I'm fitting. I can see the cube. And now I'm going to click on it once, and you'll see this contextual menu pop up on the bottom of the screen. So down here we have the Smart Scale tool. We're going to click that, and this will allow us to adjust the dimensions of our object in one axis or more at a time. So it can let us split that up. So for instance, on the top here, I want to scale my object down, so I'm going to click the little black arrow and move it down. Excuse me. And then I'm going to click and drag this guy out. So now I have essentially a tabletop. You can either left click somewhere, enter to end the scene, or you can click on the arrow. Sometimes the arrow isn't the check mark. Sometimes the check mark isn't there, so I always like to just say hit enter, and that'll be you'll save your edits essentially. And then next, what we're going to do is we're going to create another cube. So I'm going to go to box, And remember that little white dot? That is where the center of the cube is. So we want to make sure that center of the cube is on the corner of your tabletop. The easiest way to do that is to move your cursor up slowly towards one of the edges. And once you hit the edge, you'll notice it highlights, it lights up. And you can move your cursor forward and back along the edge. And you want to move up to the corner, and then you're going to click. A lot of times I'll see students, they'll end up like that. Their cube will be on it, but they'll be either on the vertical edge there, you can see it's highlighted, or they'll be off to the side like that. Make sure they're on the bottom edge, and make sure that if they have any trouble, just kind of move your mouse around so that it's facing down on one of these two bottom edges. And then you're going to left click to accept and zoom out. We can see our object. We now have a cube in the center of, a cube in the corner of our tabletop. So then next, I'm going to click on the cube. And once you click on an object, you get the option to kind of go deeper into it. You can select individual components of that object. So I can select the face here. I can select the edge. I can select the other face. I'm going to select this face, and you get this little gear icon. This gear is a contextual menu. So for instance, if I click on an edge, I'll get different options than if I click on a face. I'm going to click on the face, and I'm going to go to press pull. I'm going to just click and drag on the arrow so that it lines up with the edge of my tabletop. And I'm going to just left click somewhere in the scene, accepts it, or you can hit enter. And I'm just going to do that again for each side of this table leg, so that I can get a square table. So what I'm doing here is I'm trying to get students to understand that basically this little gear icon menu, and the press pull command is actually used a ton. So it's a good way to introduce this early on in a simple project that students can grasp. So next I'm going to make 4 more of these, and the easiest way to do that is to select it, select your table leg, then hit Control-C on your keyboard, then Control-V. A lot of students have trouble with that, so make sure to just tell them Control-C, Control-V, not just copy-paste. And if you'll know you did it right if your table leg lights up as a dark blue, and you get this little movement widget. It's really important that students understand that they use these arrows to drag. And the reason for that is because, as you can see, this arrow is parallel with these grid lines. This arrow is parallel with these grid lines. And this arrow goes up and down. So basically this lets us move our object in controlled increments. So I'm going to move it over there and click to accept. Now a lot of times I'll see students, they'll grab the object like this, or I'll use this one instead. They'll copy and paste it, and they'll be like, oh, I just want to move this over. I'll grab the little dot in the middle and I'll just drag it. First of all, you notice how it's not moving, or how it is moving smoothly. It's because it's not snapping. And you notice I can't seem to get it to line up quite right with the other one. That's because by clicking on this little dot in the middle, I'm actually moving it in all 3 axes at once. So you can see I actually moved it down a little bit too by accident. That's why it's really critical for you to enforce to students. Let me delete that. It's really critical for you to enforce to students that you need to move using the arrows. Okay? So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to select the 2 of them. Control-C, Control-V. Did it right because they lit up dark blue, and we have the little movement widget. I'll grab this arrow, and I'll just drag it away. And I'll rotate to make sure I line it up properly. And there we go. The very last thing we're going to do is we're going to go to the Combine tool, and we're going to hit Merge. So we're going to select the source object, the root of everything we're going to attach to it. And what Merge basically does is it allows us to combine multiple separate objects into one singular one. So I'm going to select these. I'm going to hit Enter. And now you can see that there's no edge there anymore, and the object is completely centered. Sometimes students get concerned about it being below the grid. It's not a problem that it is, but it's a good opportunity if yours ends up like this to show them how to use the Move tool. So I'll click on the object, and I go down to the contextual bar at the bottom, and I'll click on the little anchor, and that's the Move tool, and then I can just drag my table up. And then I'll click somewhere else to accept, and now we have a table. Looks like something from IKEA, right? Okay, so that's it for that exercise. Let's start a new one. So then this one I typically don't do with younger kids. I mostly only do this one with adults. This is using sketches to create geometry. So earlier we explored how to use the primitives tool to create geometry using simple block objects. Now we're going to do the same thing, except we're going to use a sketch instead. A sketch is a two-dimensional drawing. It's like you're drawing on a piece of paper. And let's just dive into it, and you'll see what I mean. So I'm going to click on the sketch. I'm going to go to the sketch tool. I'm going to click the circle option, and then you'll see click on grid, sketch, or solid face to start sketching. So I usually do this with my hands in the classroom, but basically, if you hold up your hand to your face and you say like, okay, in the 3D world, you can draw on a 2D plane, but it's like a piece of paper. So the computer doesn't know where the piece of paper is. So if I'm holding my hand up, it could be, facing me directly, it could be below me, it could be above me. So what you're doing with this first click when you activate the sketch tool is saying, hey, this is what I want my piece of paper to be. So we want our piece of paper to be the grid. So I'm going to click on the grid. And then here's a great opportunity to use the view cube. I'm going to go up here to the top right corner. I'm going to click on top. And now I'm looking at the grid from the top down. And I'll click in the center. Just move my mouse away. Click again. And then I'm going to hit enter. That's my first one. Students always get confused with this one. What you need to do is when you go to the sketch, we're going to make 3 circles. They always get confused here. You click on circle. And then you do not click on the original sketch because you see what it says? It says click to edit sketch. We don't want to edit the sketch. We want to create another sketch because we want to move it independently of the first one. So I'm just going to run through this really quickly, and then I'll go back and explain my steps so we can work through it together. That's usually how I like to do it in the classroom, so I'm going to do it on the video too. So I'm going to click out here, click out a circle, hit the check mark, do another sketch, click out here, do this, click a check mark. Now I have 3 circles. I'm going to grab one of them by clicking on the inside, go to the move tool, move it up, move it up. And I really think that it's a good idea to do this first by hand, by just kind of showing everybody what you're going to build, and then going back through it, and then doing it step by step with the class, because kind of doing these steps individually, you don't really understand what it is you're making or why or it is you're doing, what you're doing. And then I'm going to do one last step. I'm going to do a shell to create a vase. All right, and I can drag that arrow to make that thicker or thinner. And there we go. So let's start over. I'm going to just keep on doing until we go back to the beginning. And then I'm going to go to the sketch tool. Again, I'm going to click on the grid. Or, sorry, I was already in the sketch tool. You can tell if you're in the sketch tool by how the grid kind of shrinks. You see how it just did that? Now it grows because I'm out of the sketch tool. So I'll click on that, click on the grid. And I'll click here in the center. I'll drag out it's click and release. It's not click and drag. And I'll click the check mark to exit the mode. And I'll go back to the sketch tool. Click again on the grid, not on the sketch. I'm going to click on the grid. Draw out another circle. Exit mode. I'm going to go to the sketch circle. Click on the grid, not the circle. Click and draw out another circle and click the check mark. Next, I'm going to click on the inside of the shaded area of the circle, not on the edge. Remember, this contextual menu changes, so if I click on the edge, I'm going to get a different set of options than if I click on just the inside. I'm going to move it up using the move tool. Click outside to accept. Click on the next one. Go to move, drag it up. Click outside to accept. It's pretty easy. If students don't like their shape or the size of their circles, they can actually click them, go to the context menu, and then go to scale, and they can click and drag this arrow to resize them. And again, you click out to accept it, and then we're good. So the next step is we're gonna select all of these in a row like you saw me do before. I'm gonna hold Shift, and I'm gonna click in the same general area on each circle. The reason for this is because Loft, the tool we're going to use next, this one here, it uses where you click as a determinant for where the seam is going to be. So basically, if I click here, then here, it's going to go, oh, this side of this circle needs to be attached to that side of that circle. Then if I click there on this side, it's going to be like, oh, it's a zigzag, and it's not going to work. So you have to click very carefully roughly near the same location. If you click in the center, you have to click in the center of all 3 of them. Also make sure you're clicking on the circle itself, not on the edge. Then you go to the gear icon, you go to Loft, and you hit enter. Or click, either one. So the next thing here is that you want to make sure So to make that shell that I showed you before, you want to click on the top of your object, the top face, but it doesn't always work. And the reason for that is because we're actually clicking on the circle that's at the top of our vase. So what I like to do is I like to click on my object, go down to the move tool, and then just click and drag it over to the side. And this is a workflow thing. This is something you want to explain to your older students. Is basically, it's like the reason you move this over to the side is not only so that you can edit it and work on it, but also because by keeping the original sketches in place, if you mess something up on this, like let's say you accidentally, and I'll show how I do this in a later step, but let's say you accidentally cut a box out of this one here. Oh crap! Now I got to go back and like redo the whole thing. The nice thing about keeping your sketches in the scene is because you can just go, oh, I'll just make a new one, and then go to there, go to Loft, and hit Enter. Or sorry, it's left click, not Enter, and then you can delete the original. So that's something I just like to communicate to students. You're moving your object off to the side. The reason you're keeping these original sketches there is so if you mess up on the object you just created, you can always go back without having to redraw everything. Finally, the last step is you click on your vase, so that gets you into the interior edit mode, like we did with the table legs. And then we're going to click on the top of the object, and then we're going to go down to the gear icon and go to Shell, and that'll allow us to drag in. Click on the object, click on the top face, go to Shell. That'll allow us to drag in or out using the arrow to make it thicker or thinner. Then you hit Enter. That's all there is to it. Okay, so next we're going to go over to making a rocket. I'm going to start with making a rocket for the younger kids or less computer literate students. It's a little quicker, it's easier. We're going to start with a cylinder. Oops, wrong one. Here's a cylinder. Notice that I accidentally created that object there. Make sure you delete, so select and hit delete on your keyboard. We'll go into why that's important once we get to the 3D printing stage. So I've created my cylinder. I'm going to make it a little taller by, again, clicking on the object, going to the top face, and going to the press pull. So you're seeing how these skills are stacking on each other from lesson to lesson. And then I'm going to grab the edge. I'm going to go to the gear, and I'm going to fill it. I'm just going to drag this out. Some students, they might have difficulty with this. They might drag too quickly, and then you get this error. Just tell them to go very slowly, and it should be okay. So hit Enter. And then I'm going to go and create another cylinder. I'm going to place it on the bottom, and I'm going to scale it in. So I'm going to just go to the Scale tool, drag this in, and click outside. And then I'm going to go to the Move tool and move it up into the previous cylinder. And this one's just fun. Students, especially the younger ones, they always find the additive, subtractive, Boolean options really fun. So I like to incorporate those as much as I can. I'm going to subtract this object from that object. So I'm going to go to Combine. I'm going to go to Subtract. I'm going to select the solid I want to keep. And then I'm going to select the solid I want to take away. And I'm going to hit Enter. And there we go. We have our object, okay? One thing I also like to tell students is that, hey, if you don't like the shape of your rocket, you can actually change that pretty easily by just selecting it, going to the Scale tool, the Smart Scale tool. And if you click on the little arrow at the top, you can drag it up to make it more like a rocket shape. Click the check mark. There you go. Next, I'm going to go to the Primitives tool. I'm going to add a cone. I'm going to put it on the bottom. And then I want to select that cone. I'm going to go to the Move tool. And you see these little handles off to the side? That lets us rotate our object. So I'm going to click and drag on that handle to flip it upside down. It should say 180. You can also just type in 180 and hit Enter. Depending on, how much your students are comfortable with the program so far. I usually just use the drag handle, but you can also tell them to type it in. So then now my cylinder, my cone is a little below the bottom of my rocket. So I want to grab the Move tool, just push it up so I can see that it intersects. You can see there that it's starting to intersect the cylinder. Oops. Do that again. Move it up. There we go. So left click somewhere else to accept. So you got a cone, that's pretty cool. We're going to go to the shell tool. So click on the gear, go to shell, drag it in. Left click to accept. So we've got our little rocket shape, right? Next I want to go to combine, merge. Just want to select this and then select my cone, hit enter, make sure they're joined. And then next we're going to make the fins. So I'm going to start with a cube, place a cube in the scene. I'm going to select the cube. I'm going to go to Smart Scale. I'm going to grab one of these little side things. I'm going to stretch it out so that it looks kind of like a fin, right? Squish it up. I'm going to go to the top view. I'm going to select the cube. Go to the Move tool. By the way, if your Move tool for some reason doesn't show up down here, it's also up here on the top of the screen. I'm going to click on the arrows to kind of move it in place. You see this little plane here? You can also click on this plane to move in the X and Y direction. Same way, if you click on this plane, you move in the Y and Z direction. But if your students don't feel comfortable with that, you can just keep reinforcing the arrows. That's really what's critical, is making sure that they understand to use the arrows. So you left click away. Now your object is intersecting your rocket. We're going to go to click on the little fin to get inside of it. Now we can select all the individual components. So I'm going to click on the edge here, go to the gear, go to the chamfer tool, and just click and drag to make it look like a fin. Okay, left click to accept. And then we're going to do one last thing here. I'm going to select I'm actually going to move this in so it looks a little cooler. So just move that in so it's more flush. There we go. So I'm going to go to the pattern tool. So create a circular pattern. I'm going to select the solid. This sometimes gets a little confusing because it allows you to select faces for some reason. Make sure when you click it, the whole object is highlighted, not just one face like you see here. If you have the whole object highlighted and a face selected, that's okay as long as the whole object is highlighted. Next, you go up to click axis. Then you select any ring, so you can select the cylinder, you can select the bottom of the cylinder, you can select the bottom edge of the cone. You click, and then you can click and drag on this little handle to increase or decrease the amount. Okay, left click to accept. There's your rocket. The next thing we're going to do is I always like to put a little cockpit on. Kids seem to like that. I'm going to go to the torus. I'm going to put that into the world space. I'm going to put a sphere into the middle of the torus. I'm going to click on the sphere. I'm going to move it down so it's about halfway into the object. So they're the two of them. And then I'm going to combine them so they stick together. Hit enter. So now I have a little object, a little spheroid thing. It's like a little Saturn. I'm going to go to the scale tool, shortcut S, that's what you just saw. Click and drag this little guy in to make it smaller. Left click to accept. Go to the top view. Move this guy so that he is in line with the center of my rocket. I'm going to rotate it so that it's kind of from the side. So it's standing straight up and down. I'm going to move it up and then place it up into the rocket. And there we go. So the final thing that I like to tell kids, or just basically anybody who's taking the class, is how to prepare your model for 3D printing. This is usually where the kids class ends. The adults, I get a little bit more time to get into depth on orienting the model for printing, but you can watch that part of the video as well if you're interested in seeing it, explaining it to your students. But basically what I do now is I go to Autodesk, 123 Design, export as 3D, select STL. Coarse, medium, fine is usually the resolution of the mesh, so that's how smooth the surfaces are. So medium's usually fine. Always check combine objects if it's available. Oh, and one last thing. I'm actually going to hit cancel. Remember earlier when I said it would be important we're going to talk about if you accidentally create an object out on the side. A lot of times I'll see students do that, so they'll be working and they'll have something way off in space that they never see, and they kind of forgotten about it because they're just focused on what they're working here. So that's why the fit command is really helpful. You're going to hit fit. And now you can see, oh, I have this other object out here. So you want to make sure to select any of those extra objects, hit delete to remove them, hit fit to zoom back in. Now it's just our rocket. Okay, so once again, we're going to go back to export as 3D. We're going to go to STL, hit combine objects. This is basically doing the same thing as a Boolean merge, which you saw us do to combine the cone with the rest of the rocket body. You hit OK, and you just type in your model, kids rocket sample. Hit save. That's all there is to it. You'll load that into your 3D printer. Let's do the adults rocket now, and then we'll talk a little bit about how I get into orienting a model for printing. So I'm not going to save. So the adults model I do right after the vase, and it's just kind of reinforcing that sketching technique. So I'm going to go to Sketch, create a circle, click on the grid to define my sketch plane, draw a circle. Hit enter, do the same thing, click on the grid, draw another circle, hit enter, click on the grid, draw another circle, hit enter, hit the check mark, enter or the check mark. Sometimes the check mark doesn't show up. So I'll click inside the sphere, or inside the cylinder, sorry, inside the circle. I'll go to the move tool, I'll move it up, I'll do the same thing with the little one. There we go. Move that all the way up to the top. Left click to select or deselect. And then I'm going to do the same shift, select, and then go to the gear, go to loft. Okay? I'm going to move this off to the side. And I'm going to click on the top edge, same thing as I did with the kids model. I'm going to go to fillet, just drag that in, left click outside, and then of course I tell them, hey, if you don't like your model's shape, you can actually change it. So I go to the Smart Scale tool, and I usually drag it up to make it a little bit more rocket body shaped. Exit, we're all good. Next, I do the same thing. I add a cylinder at the bottom. You'll see it snaps to the center, kind of jumps like that. That's how you know it's in the center. I'll select the object, go down to the scale tool, drag it up, left click to select or accept, go to combine, subtract. I'll select the thing I want to keep, the thing I want to take away, hit enter. We have our little guy here. And then I'm going to go to the cone tool, add a cone in the bottom, select it, scale it, click it again, go to the move tool, rotate it so it's upside down. Cool. Select the bottom of the cone, shell. There we go. So we got our rocket shape. I'm going to combine the two of them, so I'm going to go to merge, target, source, hit enter. Then I'm going to go back to making the cube, or the fin rather. So I'll create a cube. Select it, go to Smart Scale, drag it out, squish it in, pull it up, hit check mark. And then I'll just move this into the rocket. I'm going to go to the top view, make sure it's aligned in the center. Cool. And then again, I'm going to go to the edge. So I'll select the edge, go to the gear, go to chamfer. Click and drag it down. Select. Then I'm going to go to the pattern tool, select circular pattern, select the solid, then click on, say, the bottom ring of the cylinder of the rocket body. I'll drag out a couple, and then left click to accept. Then this is where it starts to diverge really from this is where we from the kids things where we start getting into more advanced looking geometry. I'm going to go to the merge tool, combine. I'm going to select the body itself. I'm going to select the fins. Hit enter. So now the fins are actually a part of the body. I'm going to select the body. Then I'm actually going to grab each of the fins, the edge on the top of each of the fins. Hold shift, select them all at once. Go to the gear and go to the fillet tool, and I'm going to drag these out. So now I'm getting some more smooth shape transitions. Next, I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to do it for the sides. One thing I like to communicate to students here is that fillet order will change how the fillets look. So if I, for instance, here, I'll just show you this really quickly. If I fillet these guys first, right, and then click to accept, and then I fillet these, I'll show you what happens. Okay, so I'll fillet these for second. A little bit too much there. There we go. So you see that looks pretty different. That looks pretty strange. But if I fillet, let me do this again. I'll select the top edges. Go to the fillet tool, and I'll fillet these. Oops, not too much. Just enough to make it look smooth, but not enough to kind of blow out the top face there. Hit accept. Now, if I go to fillet the side edges, select all of them. So when I'm doing this in class, I usually like to, so I'll show how to do this. This is usually after most students have accomplished, building the rocket, merging all the things. I don't usually like to walk around too much during this step. I'll drag out the fillets, and you'll see it looks a lot different now. So fillet order, and I'm trying to explain that to students as I go. Fillet order is important, so make sure to kind of, just kind of explain it, or at least mention it. Okay, so now we have our rocket. I'm going to go to Export as 3D, STL. You notice there is no Combine Objects option. That's because all the objects in the scene are together, so there's no separate bodies to combine. So I'm going to hit OK. I'm going to say Adults Rocket Sample, and that's it. So this is where I usually like to get into explaining 3D printing afterwards, or orienting for printing, especially for the adults. We have FDM machines at Hatch, so most of the time I explain those. For Formlabs machines, SLA machines, there's special logic for it. We're going to be putting out, there's actually a webinar that we put out already that you can go and view for some tips on that. We're going to have some videos in a little bit that also explain it in a little bit more detail. But basically, when orienting for printing, I always like to go into either the software we use at Hatch or just here in 123, and I kind of explain hey, if you're printing, it kind of goes in a zigzag way, like that, when you're printing layer upon layer. So I explain, the best way to print this is standing upright, because the printer is more accurate going in a circle on a flat axis than if it's standing up, stuff like that. So I don't want to get too much into detail on it, but that's pretty much it for this tutorial. So thank you guys for watching. I hope the lesson plan is helpful. Please shoot me any questions you have. Jordan@formlabs.com. Happy printing.